Did you know that in the century before the most beautiful art in human history was created, the world felt like it was ending? Imagine a time when the most advanced medical advice for a global pandemic was to sniff a bouquet of flowers and hope for the best. Which, to be fair, is still a step up from some internet remedies you find today. It was a dark, quiet, and profoundly changed world. But in that silence, a whisper was beginning to stir. Before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel to encourage me to make more content like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, and let's begin tonight's journey. You are standing in the middle of the 14th century, and the air itself feels thin, hollowed out. A generation has passed since the Great Pestilence. The Black Death scythed its way across the continent, but its shadow still looms long and dark over every field and town. You can almost feel the ghostly silence in the villages where a third, or even half, of the population simply vanished. The world is quieter now, not with peace, but with absence. The old certainties have crumbled. The rigid structures of feudal life, the unquestioned authority of the church, the very idea that God's plan was benevolent and easy to understand, all of it was shaken to its core. When death can arrive so swiftly and indiscriminately, it changes how you see life. It changes everything. In the cobbled streets of European cities, you see the psychological scars etched onto the living. There is a strange mix of fervent, almost hysterical piety and a reckless carpe diem abandon. On one corner, you might see a procession of flagellants, grim-faced men whipping their own backs to atone for the sins they believe brought God's wrath upon them, their chants a low, mournful drone. It is a raw, unsettling display of medieval fear. Yet, just a few streets over, in a tavern, you hear boisterous laughter. You see merchants who survived the plague now flush with inherited wealth, spending it on fine clothes and lavish feasts. They saw firsthand how fleeting life is, and they are determined to experience its pleasures while they can. The old world taught you to prepare your soul for the next life. This new, wounded world is whispering a different lesson, to make the most of this one. Historians still debate whether the Renaissance was a sudden, miraculous dawn, or simply the moment when a long, slow sunrise finally crested the horizon. But whatever it was, its first true light began to glint in one particular place, a city in the heart of Tuscany, Florence. As you walk its narrow, crowded streets, it doesn't look like the cradle of a new age just yet. It smells of wool, leather, and wood smoke. It is a city of commerce, of artisans, of bankers. It is a republic, fiercely proud and constantly squabbling, run not by ancient nobles, but by powerful guilds and families whose fortunes were made in trade. They are practical, ambitious, and competitive. And it is this very competition that will soon ignite a firestorm of creativity. These powerful Florentine families, these nouveau riches, are looking for a way to display their wealth and power, to wash away the stain of their profession, since usury was still considered a sin, and to ensure their name would be remembered long after they were gone. They wanted immortality, not just in heaven, but here on earth. And they would find it in stone, in paint, and in the rediscovery of a long-forgotten ideal, the limitless potential of humankind. A whisper is turning into a conversation, an argument, a challenge. It is the sound of a rebirth. You follow the flow of commerce through the city, past the workshops of weavers, where the clatter of looms fills the air, and you begin to understand that Florence is built on two things: wool and money. And one family has mastered the art of money more than any other. You see their symbol everywhere, a coat of arms with several red balls on a golden field. It is the crest of the Medici. They are not old nobility with ancient bloodlines and vast ancestral lands. They are something new, something far more modern, and in many ways more powerful. They are bankers. And in this city, at this moment, that makes them kings in all but name. You approach their family home, not yet the Grand Pitti Palace, but a more modest, though still imposing, stone residence. It feels more like a fortress than a house, a testament to the precarious nature of power in a city rife with rivalries. Here, the Medici family perfected the machinery of international finance. They pioneered techniques like double-entry bookkeeping, a system so elegant and logical that it allowed them to see the flow of capital with perfect clarity. It was the financial equivalent of an artist discovering the rules of perspective. Suddenly, a chaotic world of transactions snapped into sharp, manageable focus. Their bank had branches in London, Geneva, and Bruges. They financed kings and popes, and their currency, the golden florin, became the stable, trusted dollar of its day. The true source of their immense power, however, came from being the official bankers to the papacy. Imagine managing the accounts for the largest and wealthiest organization in the Western world. Every tithe, every indulgence, every fee collected from every corner of Christendom flowed through their ledgers. This role as God's bankers gave them wealth beyond imagination, but it also presented a problem. The sin of usury, of making money from money, still clung to their profession like a shroud. How do you launder your reputation when your very success is built on a practice condemned by the church you serve? The answer was patronage. You pour your suspect profits into things of unquestionable virtue and beauty. You fund the construction of churches, the copying of ancient manuscripts, and you commission the greatest artists of your time to create masterpieces that glorify God, and by extension, glorify you. Historians still debate whether Medici patronage was a genuine love for the arts or a calculated political strategy for maintaining power. The truth is likely that it was both, a seamless blend of piety, pride, and public relations. At the head of this empire is a man you rarely see in public, Cosimo de' Medici. He holds no official title as ruler of Florence, yet he controls everything from the shadows. He is a master of soft power, placing his allies in key government positions, quietly exiling his rivals, and using his vast wealth to make the city dependent on his goodwill. He is a shrewd, patient man who understands that true power doesn't need a crown. As an eccentric little nod to their family name, which means doctors, some believe the balls on their coat of arms represent medicinal pills, a symbol of their more humble origins. Others, perhaps more cynically, say they just represent coins. Whatever their origin, they symbolize a new kind of dynasty, one built not on swords and castles, but on credit and influence. Cosimo and his family are about to invest their fortune in a generation of geniuses, turning their golden florins into a golden age. From the world of finance and shadowy power, you now turn your gaze upward, toward the heart of the city's spiritual and civic life. You stand in the piazza before the great cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore. For over a century, it has been a masterpiece in progress, a stunning creation of pink, green, and white marble. But it has also been a source of profound municipal embarrassment, because for decades, its center has been open to the sky, a giant, gaping hole where its crowning glory was meant to be. It is an octagonal chasm nearly 150 feet across, a wound in the heart of Florence, a monument to an ambition that had far outstripped the technical ability of the age. They had built the church so grandly that no one, not the master masons, not the finest architects, knew how to build the roof. The city fathers held a competition, a desperate call for a solution. The proposals that came in were a testament to the scale of the problem. One suggested filling the entire cathedral with a mountain of dirt mixed with coins, building the dome on top of it, and then telling the citizens they could keep any coins they found as they cleared the dirt out. It was a charmingly ridiculous idea, a sort of citywide treasure hunt to solve an engineering crisis. But then a man stepped forward. He was not a famous architect. He was a goldsmith and a clockmaker, a man named Filippo Brunelleschi. He was short, bad-tempered, and notoriously secretive, but he possessed a mind that saw the world in terms of gears, levers, and exquisite geometry. He came to the competition with a plan so audacious and so lacking in detail that the judges thought him a madman. He refused to explain his methods, certain his rivals would steal them. In a famous display of theatrical problem-solving, he is said to have challenged the other hopefuls with a simple task: to make an egg stand upright on a slab of marble. After they all failed, he took the egg, smartly cracked its bottom on the surface, and stood it on its end. His point was clear: the solution is often simple after a genius has shown you the way. He won the commission, not with blueprints, but with sheer, unshakable confidence. What Brunelleschi proposed was revolutionary. He would build the dome without the massive and impossibly expensive wooden scaffolding, known as centering, that everyone thought was necessary. Instead, he would build two domes, one nested inside the other, a light exterior shell to protect from the weather and a heavy, structural one within. He designed a special herringbone brick pattern that allowed the walls to curve inward as they rose, becoming self-supporting at every stage. You can almost see it in your mind's eye, a beautiful, interlocking zipper of brickwork climbing higher and higher into the sky. He invented new machines to make it happen, including a massive 3-speed ox-powered hoist that could lift colossal sandstone beams hundreds of feet into the air. It was the Renaissance equivalent of a space program, pushing the absolute limits of technology. Historians still debate the precise source of Brunelleschi's inspiration, whether it was a direct study of the Roman Pantheon or a brilliant leap of independent engineering. What is certain is that for 16 years, the dome was the talk of the city, the grandest project on Earth. As you stand there, looking up at its finished form, the warm terracotta tiles catching the Tuscan sun, you realize it is more than just a roof. It is a declaration. It is humanity, through reason and ingenuity, reaching for the heavens on its own terms. It is the architectural soul of a new age made visible. Your gaze lowers from the heavens, from that magnificent dome, and returns to the human level, to the statues that stand guard in the niches of the city's chapels and guild halls. For centuries, the figures carved from stone and cast in bronze were not meant to be people. They were symbols. You can see them on the older churches, stiff, elongated figures floating in their robes, their faces serene and generic, their bodies seemingly without weight or substance. They were placeholders for saints, prophets, and kings, designed to tell a biblical story to an illiterate populace, not to capture the messy, complicated reality of being human. They were beautiful in their own way, but they felt distant, otherworldly. Now, something is changing in the stone and metal. A new soul is being breathed into them, and its author is a man as rough and volatile as the materials he worked with. His name is Donatello. He was a close friend of Brunelleschi, and like him, possessed a prickly personality and an uncompromising vision. The two of them had famously taken a trip to Rome together years earlier, a journey that changed the course of art. You can imagine them, two brilliant, argumentative Florentines, on a sort of artistic road trip, sketching the ruins of the Forum, measuring the proportions of the Colosseum, and perhaps even digging in the dirt for fragments of forgotten statues. They were artistic archaeologists, uncovering the lost language of classical realism. And Donatello brought that language back to Florence and began to speak it in marble and bronze. He saw that the ancient Romans and Greeks knew how to make a statue look like it could draw breath and walk right off its pedestal. You see this new language in his statue of St. George, carved for the Armorers Guild. This is no placid, golden-haloed saint. This is a young, anxious warrior. You see the tension in his body, the way he stands with his weight shifted, ready to spring into action. His brow is furrowed. His eyes scan the distance for the dragon he is destined to fight. Donatello has not just carved a symbol of faith. He has captured a psychological moment, the instant of watchful anxiety before the battle. This is a man with a mind, with fears and resolve, and you feel it in the stone. A well-known story perfectly captures Donatello's fiery passion for realism. After finishing a wooden crucifix, His friend, Brunelleschi, casually remarked that he had put a peasant on the cross. Enraged by the criticism, Donatello smashed his work and challenged Brunelleschi to do better. That intensity, that demand for raw human truth, is what made his work revolutionary. His masterpiece, however, is something else entirely. In the courtyard of the Medici Palace, you stand before his statue of David, and it is shocking, not just for its beauty, but for its audacity. It is the first freestanding nude bronze sculpture created in over 1,000 years, but it is not a triumphant, muscle-bound hero from antiquity. It is a lithe, almost awkwardly adolescent boy. He stands in a relaxed, classical pose, his thoughtful gaze directed downward. He wears nothing but a shepherd's hat and boots, and his foot rests casually on the severed head of the giant Goliath. The contrast is breathtaking. The smooth, youthful body against the grotesque, bearded head of the slain foe. Historians still debate the full meaning of Donatello's David, whether it's a purely civic symbol of Florentine victory or contains a deeper, more personal exploration of vulnerability and strength. What is undeniable is its profound humanity. Donatello has taken a biblical hero and turned him into a real boy, lost in thought after a moment of impossible violence. He made the marble breathe and the bronze think. You step out of the world of stone and bronze, away from the piazza and the workshops, and into a quieter space. You find yourself in a scholar study, a room lined not with canvases, but with shelves of books and scrolls. The air smells of old parchment, leather bindings, and beeswax from the candles that burn late into the night. Dust motes dance in the single beam of sunlight slanting through a high window. This room, and others like it across Florence, is the intellectual furnace where the entire Renaissance is being forged. For centuries, the purpose of learning was singular: to better understand God and His divine plan. The ultimate texts were the Bible and the commentaries of the Church Fathers. All knowledge was a ladder to heaven. But now, you watch as a scholar unrolls a scroll that has not been read for 1,000 years. His hands tremble slightly as he deciphers the elegant Latin script. It is not a religious text. It is a collection of letters from a Roman statesman named Cicero, discussing politics, friendship, and the duties of a citizen. This is the heart of the great intellectual movement called humanism. It wasn't a rejection of God, far from it. Most humanists were devout Christians. Instead, it was a profound shift in focus. The humanists believed that to understand God, you must first understand His greatest creation, humanity. And to understand humanity, they turned to the last cultures that had placed human beings, with all their flaws and glories, at the center of the universe. Ancient Greece and Rome, they began a frantic, continent-wide scavenger hunt for the lost works of these civilizations. Patrons like Cosimo de' Medici dispatched agents to the far corners of Europe and the crumbling Byzantine Empire, paying exorbitant sums for any scrap of ancient text. One of the most famous of these book hunters was a man named Bagoio Brocellini. You can picture him, a determined scholar traveling to remote monasteries in the Swiss Alps, places where learning had gone to die. In one instance, he found a filthy, neglected tower, and at the bottom, buried under layers of dust and debris, he discovered a complete manuscript of Quintilian's On the Orator, a foundational text on rhetoric and education that had been presumed lost forever. He was literally pulling a pillar of Western civilization out of the garbage. This was happening again and again with the works of poets like Lucretius and philosophers like Plato, whose complete works were being reintroduced to Italy for the first time in centuries. Each discovery was like finding a new star in the sky, a new guide to navigate the human experience. Reading these texts changed everything. They offered a different model for a well-lived life. The medieval ideal was the contemplative monk, withdrawn from the world to pray for his soul. The classical ideal, as described by Cicero, was the active citizen, engaged in the affairs of the state, using his eloquence and reason to improve his society. This new philosophy championed the idea of virtue, not virtue in the purely Christian sense, but a kind of manly excellence, a combination of ambition, skill, and daring. It was about realizing your full potential in every field of human endeavor. Historians still debate whether humanism was primarily a literary revival or a deeper philosophical revolution that fundamentally challenged medieval piety. The reality seems to be a complex fusion, an attempt to create a new kind of person, a Christian, Roman, a citizen of both Florence and the City of God. This intellectual rebirth is the fuel for the artistic one. The artists are reading these same texts, and it is this new, profound respect for human dignity, reason, and earthly accomplishment that you see being carved into Donatello's marble and engineered into Brunelleschi's dome. You leave the scholar's dusty study and step back into the vibrant noise of the city. Drawn by the sounds of hammering and chiseling, you find yourself in one of the most prestigious workshops in all of Florence, the Bottega of Andrea del Verrocchio. This is a factory of art. Apprentices are grinding pigments, casting bronze, preparing wooden panels, and learning the 100 different skills required to be a master artist. Verrocchio himself is a brilliant craftsman, a talented painter, and an even better sculptor. But among all the diligent young men in his charge, there is one who is different. His name is Leonardo, a handsome boy from the small town of Vinci. And while his talent is undeniable, his mind is a universe unto itself, a place of restless, insatiable, and often frustrating curiosity. While other apprentices focus on the task at hand, Leonardo's attention is everywhere at once. He seems less interested in painting a saint's halo than in understanding precisely how the light would reflect from it. He stares at the eddying water in a fountain, trying to decipher its fluid dynamics. He watches a bird take flight and fills pages of a notebook with sketches of its wing structure, convinced that man, too, could one day soar through the air. You catch a glimpse of this notebook, and it is a bewildering and fascinating object. It is filled with notes written backward, from right to left, in a strange mirror script. Historians still debate why he wrote this way, whether it was to protect his ideas from prying eyes, or simply because, as a left-hander, it prevented him from smudging the wet ink as he wrote. It feels less like a code and more like the natural output of a brain that was simply wired differently from anyone else's. The pages are a riot of thought. On a single sheet, you might see a detailed botanical study of a lily, a design for a terrifying war machine with scythed chariot wheels, a grotesque caricature of a man he saw in the street, and a complex diagram of the human skull. He was an obsessive observer, a man who believed that sight was the noblest sense and that everything in the world was interconnected, waiting to be understood. One of his more eccentric habits was buying caged birds in the marketplace just for the pleasure of setting them free so he could watch them ascend into the sky. He was not just an artist, he was a scientist in an age before the word existed. He was a man trying to reverse engineer God's creation, one sketch at a time. His master, Verrocchio, recognizes his pupil's astonishing talent, but is also surely exasperated by his endless distractions. A famous story, perhaps a legend, but one that captures a deeper truth, tells of their collaboration on a painting, The Baptism of Christ. Verrocchio painted the main figures, but he assigned the young Leonardo the task of painting one of the angels. When it was finished, the angel Leonardo painted was so breathtakingly beautiful, so suffused with a gentle, divine light and psychological depth, that it made his master's work look stiff and old-fashioned. The story goes that Verrocchio was so humbled that he vowed never to pick up a paintbrush again. Leonardo was the living embodiment of the humanist ideal, the uomo universale, the universal man. He demonstrated that the boundaries between art and science were artificial, that a single human mind could strive to understand everything, from the subtle smile on a woman's face to the cataclysmic power of a flood. While Leonardo da Vinci was attempting to decode the universe with his pen and his intellect, another kind of genius was at work in Florence. A younger man, more like a force of nature than an observer of it. You hear tales of him before you see him, whispers of a brooding, solitary artist with a broken nose from a youthful brawl and a temper that could scorch stone. His name is Michelangelo Buonarroti. He is not a scientist, an inventor, or a courtly gentleman. He is a sculptor, and he sees the world not as a mystery to be solved, but as a prison of excess matter from which he must liberate the perfect forms trapped within. Where Leonardo's genius was expansive, Michelangelo's is a concentrated, ferocious fire. For nearly 40 years, a colossal block of white Carrara marble had been lying neglected in the workyard of the Florence Cathedral. It was a magnificent failure. Nicknamed the Giant, it was over 17 feet tall, but it was flawed, awkwardly shaped, and had been clumsily started and then abandoned by 2 other sculptors who had declared it unworkable. It was a monument to wasted potential, a king's ransom in marble left to be weathered by the sun and rain. The city officials of Florence, now a proud and often threatened republic, after having recently expelled the powerful Medici family, wanted a new symbol for their city. They wanted something to stand in the main square, a testament to their liberty and their willingness to defy tyrants. They decided to give the spoiled giant one last chance. Michelangelo, only 26 years old, claimed the block. He had already proven his astonishing talent in Rome with his heartbreakingly beautiful Pietà. He approached the marble with an almost frightening intensity. He built a wooden enclosure around the giant stone, shielding his work from all prying eyes. For over 2 years, he worked in near total solitude. You can imagine the scene within that shed, a constant fury of dust and noise. Michelangelo was famously unkempt, a man who looked at a bath as an unnecessary distraction from his work. He would often sleep for short periods in his clothes and boots, fueled by bread and wine, rising to attack the stone again with his hammers and chisels. He believed he could hear the statue inside the marble, screaming to be set free. His work was not a delicate process of carving. It was a violent, passionate battle between his will and the stubbornness of the stone. When the enclosure was finally removed in 1504, the city of Florence fell into a stunned silence. What emerged was not just a statue, it was a titan. This was David, but a David the world had never seen before. He was not the thoughtful, adolescent boy of Donatello's creation. He was a magnificent, powerful young man, a perfect fusion of classical anatomy and raw, pent-up energy. He is completely nude, an unapologetic celebration of the human form as God's greatest creation. But it is his face, his expression, that holds you captive. Michelangelo did not choose to depict the moment of victory with Goliath's head at his feet. He chose the moment before the fight. David's brow is furrowed, his neck is tensed, and the veins are pulsing in his hand as it clenches the stone for his sling. His gaze is not directed at you, but past you, fixed on the unseen giant he is about to face. It is a gaze of concentrated, intelligent fury. Historians still debate whether the statue was a general symbol of republican virtue, or a specific, defiant warning to the exiled Medici and other powerful enemies who threatened Florence's freedom. It was a 16-foot-tall declaration of defiance, placed directly in front of the seat of government. It was the ultimate symbol of the High Renaissance, the belief that a single, divinely inspired individual could face down any giant and, through sheer force of will, triumph. You leave the charged, defiant atmosphere of Republican Florence and travel south to the city that has for 1,000 years been the center of the Western world, Rome. But this is not the Rome of the Caesars, a city of triumphant marble ruins. Nor is it yet the magnificent Baroque city of Bernini. The Rome you enter is a chaotic, medieval place, a sprawling town built in the shadow of its former glory. Yet a new ambition is coursing through its veins, driven by a series of powerful and worldly popes who are determined to restore the city to its rightful place as the capital of a new golden age. And here, in the heart of Christendom, the third giant of the High Renaissance, is holding court. If Leonardo was the mind and Michelangelo the soul of this new age, then this man is its perfect, smiling face. His name is Raffaello Sanzio, known to the world as Raphael. He is everything the other two are not. He is young, impossibly handsome, wealthy, and effortlessly charming. Where Leonardo was a reclusive intellectual and Michelangelo a tormented solitary, Raphael is a social genius, comfortable in the highest circles of power. You see him moving through the papal court, dressed in fine velvet, exchanging witty remarks with cardinals and ambassadors. He runs a massive, well-organized workshop, a bustling enterprise of talented assistants who help him execute the vast number of commissions that pour in. He is not a struggling artist. He is a prince of painters, a celebrity who has mastered both his art and the art of success. His style is the culmination of everything that has come before. He learned from the masters of the previous generation, absorbing Leonardo's soft, smoky light, known as sfumato, and Michelangelo's powerful, muscular figures. But in his hands, these elements are transformed into something new. His work is defined by an almost supernatural sense of grace, harmony, and clarity. There is no struggle in Raphael's art. There is only a serene, effortless perfection. It is as if he saw the world not as it is, but as it should be, an idealized vision of beauty and order. This supreme talent for synthesis, for creating a perfect whole from the best parts, made him the ideal artist for the popes, who wanted to project an image of divine authority and intellectual sophistication. You are ushered into the private apartments of the Pope himself, into a series of rooms known as the Stanze della Signatura, and there, on one of the walls, you are confronted with his masterpiece, a fresco that perfectly embodies the entire spirit of the Renaissance. It is the School of Athens. It is a breathtaking scene, a grand gathering of all the greatest philosophers and scientists of the ancient world, assembled within a magnificent classical building that seems to stretch into infinity. At the very center of the composition are the two giants of Greek thought. Plato, painted with the face of the aging Leonardo da Vinci, points upward toward the heavens, to his realm of ideal forms. Beside him, his student Aristotle gestures firmly toward the earth, to the world of observable, tangible reality. It is a perfect visual summary of the two main pillars of Western philosophy. Around them are dozens of other figures, Pythagoras scribbling in a book, Euclid bending down to draw a geometric diagram. As an eccentric signature, Raphael painted himself into the scene. On the far right, a young man in a dark cap, peering out of the painting and directly at you, the only figure to make eye contact. He is a humble witness to this grand congress of genius. Historians still debate the precise identity of every figure in the sprawling composition, leading to endless speculation about Raphael's intellectual circle. What is certain is that in the very heart of the Vatican, the Pope's private library, Raphael has painted a glorious celebration of pre-Christian, pagan reason. It is the ultimate statement of humanist belief that faith and philosophy are not in conflict, but are two parallel paths leading to the same divine truth. The light of the Renaissance was not confined to Italy. It was an idea, a fire, and now that fire was about to be given wings, not by an artist or a philosopher, but by a craftsman hundreds of miles to the north. You leave the sun-drenched piazzas of Rome, the world of singular, breathtaking masterpieces commissioned by popes and princes, and you travel northward over the formidable barrier of the Alps. The air grows cooler, the light softer. You find yourself in the German city of Mainz, a bustling commercial hub on the Rhine River. There is no grand dome here, no Sistine Chapel. The atmosphere is different, more practical, more industrious, and in a workshop tucked away on a side street, an invention is taking shape that will have a more profound and lasting impact on the world than any painting or statue. Before this moment, you must understand what a book was. It was a treasure. You can picture a monk in a monastery scriptorium, his back hunched over a desk in the dim, cold light. For months, sometimes for over a year, he would painstakingly copy a single text, one letter at a time, with a quill pen on expensive, specially prepared animal skin or vellum. An illuminator might then spend months more adding intricate, beautiful illustrations in gold leaf and crushed lapis lazuli. The finished product was a unique work of art, but it was also fantastically expensive, costing as much as a small farm. A library with 30 books was considered vast. Knowledge was a locked garden, accessible only to the clergy and the wealthiest sliver of the nobility. In this workshop in Mainz, you meet a man named Johannes Gutenberg. He is not a scholar. He is a goldsmith, a metal worker, a man who understands alloys and presses from his work minting coins. He is a practical inventor with an entrepreneur's vision. He has been working in secret for years, borrowing heavily and fending off suspicious creditors, all to solve a single, monumental problem: how to make books quickly and cheaply. He did not invent the press itself, as wine and paper presses had existed for centuries. His true genius was in combining three key elements into a single, revolutionary system. First, you see the trays filled with his most important innovation: movable type. Hundreds of tiny, individual letters cast in a durable metal alloy that could be arranged and rearranged to form any word, any sentence, any page. Second, he developed a new kind of ink, a thick, oil-based concoction that would stick to the metal type but not run on the paper. And third, he adapted a screw press to apply firm, even pressure, transferring the ink from the type to the page flawlessly every single time. You watch as the system comes to life. A worker arranges the letters in a frame, a mirror image of the desired text. He locks it into place, dabs it with the thick, black ink, lays a sheet of paper on top, and with a powerful pull of a wooden lever, turns the great screw of the press. He releases it, peels back the paper, and there it is, a perfect, clean page of text. While the monk in the scriptorium is still sharpening his quill, Gutenberg's press can produce hundreds of identical pages in a single day. In 1455, his first major project was completed, a beautifully printed edition of the Bible. The Gutenberg Bible was not a cheap paperback. It was still a magnificent and expensive object, but he had proven the concept. Historians still debate whether Gutenberg truly invented printing, as movable type technology had existed in China for centuries, or if his true genius was in creating a viable, efficient system for the complex Western alphabet. Tragically for Gutenberg, he was a better inventor than a businessman. Just as his press was perfected, his main financial backer, Johann Fust, sued him and took over the entire operation, leaving the inventor nearly bankrupt. But the secret was out. The age of the scribe was over. The age of information had begun. The ideas of the Italian humanists, the discoveries of scientists, the angry theses of reformers, they could all now be reproduced in the thousands and spread across the continent with the speed of the wind. A new kind of renaissance, a renaissance of the word, was about to explode across Europe. You travel now, leaving the solid, earthy heart of Europe and journeying eastward toward the sea. The landscape changes, flattening into marshland, and the air begins to taste of salt. And then you see it, a city that should not exist, a mirage shimmering on the horizon. Venice, it does not rise from the ground. It floats upon the water, a magnificent and impossible creation of wood, stone, and sheer commercial will, built on 100 small islands in a shallow lagoon. There are no rumbling carts or clopping horses here. The streets are canals of green water, and the silence is broken only by the lapping of waves against marble steps and the soft calls of the gondoliers. This is La Serenissima, the most serene republic, and the Renaissance it experiences will be as unique and shimmering as the light reflecting off its waterways. The first thing you notice is this light. It is different from anywhere else in Italy. It is a soft, diffused light, reflected up from the water filtered through the damp sea air. It seems to make colors richer, deeper, more alive. You also feel the humidity, a constant clinging presence. These two facts of Venetian life, the light and the water, shaped its art completely. In Florence and Rome, the grand art form was fresco, painting on wet plaster, a technique that requires dry walls and a stable climate. Here in Venice, the salty, damp air would cause fresco to crack and peel almost immediately. It was a practical impossibility. So, Venetian artists turned to a different technology, one that had trickled down from the north: oil paint on stretched canvas. This medium was not just a substitute, it was a revelation. Oil paint allowed for a depth of color, a subtlety of blending, and a richness of texture that fresco could never achieve. It was the perfect medium to capture the unique, luminous atmosphere of their floating city. This practical difference led to a profound philosophical one. In Florence, the foundation of all art was disegno, or drawing. It was an intellectual art, based on clear lines, precise perspective, and the careful study of anatomy. It was art that appealed to the mind. The Venetians, however, came to champion color, or color. They believed that color, not line, was the best tool to capture the truth of the world and to appeal directly to the emotions. Their art was not about intellectual clarity, it was about sensory experience. It was about mood, atmosphere, and feeling. You can see this in the work of the masters who founded the Venetian school, like Giovanni Bellini. His paintings of saints and Madonnas are bathed in a warm, gentle, golden light that feels almost divine, a light that seems to emanate from the colors themselves. Then you encounter the work of a painter named Giorgione, a mysterious genius who died young and left behind only a handful of works. You stand before his most famous painting, The Tempest. It is a puzzle. On one side of a stormy landscape, a nearly nude woman nurses a baby. On the other, a young soldier stands, watching them. In the background, a bolt of lightning cracks the sky. What does it mean? No one knows. Historians still debate the true meaning of Giorgione's The Tempest, a painting that seems to defy any single interpretation. Unlike a Florentine work, its goal is not to tell a clear story, but to evoke a feeling, a poetic, dreamlike mood. Finally, you witness the work of the undisputed king of Venetian painting, Titian. He is an international superstar, a master of color who uses bold, visible brushstrokes to create canvases that pulse with life. His portraits capture the souls of his subjects. His religious scenes are filled with human drama, and his mythological paintings, like the famous Venus of Urbino, are unapologetic celebrations of sensual, worldly beauty. The Renaissance in Venice was not a rebirth of ancient Rome. It was the birth of something entirely new, an art of pure, glorious sensation. Your journey now takes you back to Rome, the epicenter of ambition and power. The city is buzzing with a renewed sense of purpose under the command of a pope who embodies the spirit of the age. Pope Julius II. He is not a humble spiritual leader. He is a warrior, a statesman, a brilliant and terrifyingly impatient patron who dreams of restoring Rome to its imperial glory. He has already laid the foundation stone for a new St. Peter's Basilica, a project of such colossal scale it would take over a century to complete. And now, he has a new project in mind, and he has summoned the only artist in the world with an ego and ambition to match his own. He has called for Michelangelo. The artist arrives in Rome, expecting to work on the Pope's monumental tomb, a project involving 40 larger-than-life statues that would have been the masterpiece of his career. But Julius, ever impulsive, has changed his mind. He points upward to the vast, vaulted ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the Pope's private chapel, and the very place where new popes are elected. It is a huge, barrel-shaped space, over 130 feet long, and its ceiling is a simple blue field painted with golden stars, a decoration that Julius now finds utterly unworthy. He commands Michelangelo to paint it, to cover it with figures of the 12 apostles. Michelangelo is horrified. He protests, loudly and bitterly, "I am a sculptor, not a painter." He suspects this is a trap laid by his rivals, like the architect Bramante, who hoped to see him fail at the unfamiliar art of fresco and be publicly humiliated. But Julius II is not a man you refuse. He is a man who once personally led his armies into battle. His will is absolute. So, reluctantly, furiously, Michelangelo accepts the commission. But if he is to do this hated task, he will do it on his own terms. He dismisses the idea of the 12 apostles as a poor thing. Instead, he conceives a plan of such breathtaking complexity and theological depth that it leaves the Pope in stunned silence. He will not paint a dozen figures. He will paint over 300. He will depict the entire story of Genesis, from the creation of the world to the fall of humankind, surrounded by a host of Old Testament prophets and pagan sibyls who foresaw the coming of Christ. It is a project of insane, superhuman ambition. For the next 4 years, from 1508 to 1512, the Sistine Chapel becomes Michelangelo's entire world, his studio and his prison. He designs a special kind of scaffolding, a curved wooden platform that allows him to stand upright and reach the ceiling, but it forces him into an agonizingly contorted position. You can imagine him there, day after day, lying on his back, his neck craned, his face just inches from the wet plaster. Paint drips into his eyes, his beard is caked with it, and his body is racked with pain. He writes a miserable poem about the experience, complaining that his spine is bent as a Syrian bow, and that his face has become a rich pavement of paint droppings. He works almost entirely alone, having dismissed the assistants he hired, deeming them incompetent. He becomes a recluse, a ghost haunting the chapel, arguing constantly with the impatient Pope who would climb the scaffolding and demand, "When will you be finished?" Michelangelo's famous reply was always the same, "When I can." Historians still debate the full extent of the theological program of the ceiling, wondering how much was Michelangelo's own invention versus the guidance of papal theologians. The result, however, is pure, undiluted Michelangelo. When the scaffolding finally comes down, the world sees a vision unlike any other. Figures of immense power and beauty, twisting and turning with divine energy. At its center, the iconic image of God reaching out to touch the hand of Adam. A single, electric moment where divine energy sparks into human life. Michelangelo, the sculptor who hated to paint, had created the single greatest monument of the painter's art, a testament to what he called the Terribilita, the awesome, terrifying power of both God and the human spirit. You descend from the sublime, divine heights of the Sistine Chapel, back to the muddy, treacherous ground of earthly politics, while artists like Michelangelo were striving to capture a perfect, idealized vision of humanity. Another Florentine was looking at mankind with a far more cynical and pragmatic eye. He was not a painter or a sculptor. He was a diplomat, a civil servant, a man who had seen the inner workings of power, with all its deception, betrayal, and violence. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and he was about to write a book that would tear the beautiful mask off Renaissance idealism and expose the brutal mechanics of power that lay beneath. For years, Machiavelli had served the Florentine Republic, the same government that had commissioned Michelangelo's David. He was a dedicated patriot, traveling on diplomatic missions throughout Italy and Europe, meeting with kings, emperors, and popes. He was in the room, taking notes, when the great and powerful made their decisions. He saw firsthand that the world was not governed by Christian morality or philosophical ideals. It was governed by self-interest, ambition, and the calculated use of force. He saw the charismatic and utterly ruthless Cesare Borgia, son of Pope Alexander VI, carve out a state for himself in central Italy through a masterful campaign of violence and treachery. Machiavelli was both horrified and deeply impressed. Borgia was a monster, but he was an effective monster. He got things done. Then, In 1512, Machiavelli's world came crashing down. The Florentine Republic was overthrown, and the powerful Medici family returned from exile to reclaim control of the city. As a prominent official of the old regime, Machiavelli was immediately fired, and later he was arrested and brutally tortured on suspicion of conspiring against the new rulers. His political career was over. Ruined and exiled to his small farm outside the city, he had nothing left but his memories and his sharp, analytical mind. It was here, in this forced retirement, that he began to write. He poured all of his experience, all of his disillusionment, into a short, explosive book. He intended it as a kind of job application, a desperate attempt to prove his worth to the new Medici rulers. He called it The Prince. The book is a revolution in political thought. For centuries, books on how to be a good ruler had been based on Christian and classical ideals. They advised princes to be merciful, honest, generous, and loved by their people. Machiavelli tosses all of that into the fire. A prince, he argues, cannot afford to be bound by conventional morality if he wants to maintain power. You enter the cold, logical world of his advice. He writes that it is better for a ruler to be feared than to be loved, because love is fickle, but fear is constant. He argues that a prince must be as cunning as a fox to recognize traps, and as strong as a lion to frighten away wolves. He famously discusses whether a ruler must keep his promises, concluding that a wise prince should not, and cannot, keep his word when it is to his disadvantage. A well-known anecdote claims that Machiavelli wrote The Prince by candlelight each evening after a day of mundane farm work, changing into his formal court attire before entering his study to converse with the great men of antiquity. Historians still debate whether The Prince is a sincere handbook for tyrants or a subtle, satirical expose of the very nature of tyranny itself. Whatever his intent, the book was a scandal. It uncoupled politics from morality, creating a new, terrifyingly modern science of power. The beautiful dream of the Renaissance, the perfectibility of man, had just met its dark, pragmatic shadow. As the High Renaissance in Florence reached its peak of artistic glory and intellectual daring, a powerful and violent countercurrent was gathering force. You can feel a change in the mood of the city. The confident humanism and lavish displays of wealth that had fueled the great artistic projects were starting to look, to some, like sinful pride and decadent vanity. The whisper of doubt is growing into a roar, and the voice at the center of the storm belongs to a Dominican friar, a man with burning eyes and a voice that could make angels weep and devils tremble. His name is Girolamo Sapolsky. He arrived in Florence as a preacher at the convent of San Marco, a place lavishly decorated by the Medici. At first, his sermons were unremarkable, but then he began to speak of visions, of apocalyptic prophecies he claimed came directly from God. He foretold a coming scourge that would purify Florence and all of Italy of its corruption. He railed against the sins of the city, the greed of the rich, the lewdness of the art, the pagan philosophies of the humanists, and the rampant corruption of the church itself, all the way up to the Pope in Rome. His sermons were electrifying. You stand in the vast cathedral, packed with thousands of citizens, and you hear his voice echoing from the pulpit, a torrent of fire and brimstone. He is a master of rhetoric, weaving terrifying images of hell with promises of a glorious, purified New Jerusalem right here in Florence. People weep, they faint, they are seized by religious ecstasy. In 1494, his prophecy seemed to come true. A French army, led by King Charles VIII, invaded Italy and marched on Florence. The ruling Medici, led by the incompetent Piero the Unfortunate, panicked and surrendered without a fight, leading to their immediate expulsion from the city. In the resulting power vacuum, Savonarola emerged as the city's de facto leader. He was the man who had predicted it all. To the terrified and humbled Florentines, he was a true prophet. He helped establish a new theocratic republic and for a few years he was the most powerful man in the city. Florence was transformed. The once vibrant, pleasure-loving city became a somber, pious state. Women were encouraged to give up their fine clothes and jewelry. Songs heard in the streets were hymns, not popular love ballads. The culmination of this religious fervor was an event that has become infamous, the Bonfire of the Vanities. In 1497, during the festival of Mardi Gras, Savonarola organized his followers, an army of disciplined young men, to go door to door throughout the city, requesting any object that could lead to sin. You watch as great pyres are built in the main piazza. Into the flames go mirrors, cosmetics, fancy dresses, playing cards, and musical instruments. But most tragically, into the flames go books of pagan poetry by authors like Boccaccio and priceless works of art. The great artist Botticelli, famous for his sensual, mythological paintings like The Birth of Venus, was said to have become a follower of Savonarola and, in a fit of piety, willingly threw some of his own canvases onto the fire. Historians still debate the true extent of the destruction and whether masterworks were actually burned, but the symbolic act was devastating. It was a direct, violent rejection of the very Renaissance spirit of humanism, beauty, and worldly pleasure. But Savonarola's reign of fire could not last. His increasingly harsh rule made enemies, and his constant, vitriolic attacks on Pope Alexander VI, one of the most corrupt and dangerous popes in history, finally led to his excommunication. The fickle Florentine crowd turned against him as quickly as they had embraced him. In 1498, Savonarola himself was arrested, tortured, and then, in the very same piazza where he had held his bonfire of the vanities, he was publicly hanged and burned. The ashes of the prophet were thrown into the river, a final, brutal end to a turbulent chapter. A reminder that the Renaissance was not a smooth, triumphant march toward enlightenment, but a deeply conflicted and often violent battle for the soul of the age. You journey north once more, crossing the Alps into the dense forests and bustling trade cities of the Holy Roman Empire. The world here feels different, colder, more introspective. The influence of Italy is strong, its art and ideas filtering northward along the trade routes, but they are transformed by the local culture, taking on a darker, more complex, and intensely detailed character. This is the Northern Renaissance, and its greatest master is a man who embodies its unique spirit, a fusion of Italian humanism and deeply rooted Germanic piety. His name is Albrecht Dürer. You find yourself in his hometown of Nuremberg, a major center for commerce, craft, and printing. Dürer is not a temperamental genius working for a single powerful patron. He is a savvy, well-traveled, and highly successful entrepreneur. He's a master painter, but his true genius and the source of his international fame lies in his prints. Using the same technology pioneered by Gutenberg, he carves intricate images onto blocks of wood or engraves them onto copper plates. These prints can then be reproduced by the hundreds, sold cheaply, and distributed across Europe. He is one of the first artists to truly understand the power of mass media. He even developed his own distinctive AD monogram, a kind of personal logo, which he placed prominently on all his works to protect them from the rampant piracy of his designs. It was one of the first great exercises in artistic branding. His art is a marvel of obsessive detail. While an Italian artist might suggest the texture of fur with a few broad brushstrokes, Dürer will render every single hair with painstaking precision. You look at his famous engraving, The Knight, Death, and the Devil. It is a masterpiece of technical skill and symbolic depth. A stoic Christian knight rides through a dark, menacing gorge, his gaze fixed forward, undeterred by the horrifying figures who ride alongside him. A grinning, crown-wearing death, holding an hourglass, and a grotesque, pig-snouted devil. Every leaf on the trees, every rock on the ground, every link of the knight's armor is rendered with an almost hallucinatory clarity. This is not the idealized, harmonious world of Raphael. It is a world filled with anxiety, a landscape of the soul where faith is a hard-won battle against constant, terrifying threats. Dürer was also profoundly influenced by Italy. He made 2 long trips there, crossing the Alps on horseback, to study the works of the Italian masters firsthand. He was fascinated by their understanding of perspective and human anatomy. You can see him in Venice, a confident, long-haired German artist dressed in the latest fashion, eagerly absorbing the lessons of Bellini and others. He brought these ideas back with him, becoming a crucial bridge between the 2 artistic worlds. He wrote books on geometry and human proportion, attempting to provide his fellow German artists with the theoretical foundations that their Italian counterparts took for granted. One of his most famous works, a self-portrait from the year 1500, shows the stunning result of this cultural fusion. He presents himself in a full frontal pose, a pose traditionally reserved for depictions of Christ. With his long, flowing hair and intense, solemn gaze, he is not just presenting his likeness, he is making a profound statement about the divine nature of artistic creation, a core Renaissance idea translated into a distinctly northern, Christ-like image. Historians still debate whether this portrait is an act of supreme piety, likening the artist's creative act to God's, or an act of supreme artistic arrogance. Perhaps, like the Renaissance itself, it is a complex and inseparable mixture of both. He was a man who could perfectly render a humble patch of turf and weeds, and at the same time see in his own face the reflection of the divine creator. You have walked with giants, with men whose names echo through the centuries. Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, Dürer. You have seen their towering ambition, their divine talent, their furious struggles with stone and paint. But as you move through the palaces, the workshops, and the bustling city squares, a quiet question begins to form in your mind. Where are the women? In this grand narrative of rebirth and human potential, it can feel as if they are merely beautiful, silent figures in the background of a man's world, the serene Madonnas, the sensual Venuses, the anonymous faces in a crowd. But that is only half the story, the half told the loudest. If you look closer, into the margins, into the letters, into the account books, you will find that the Renaissance was not just a fraternity of genius. It was built, supported, and shaped by the unseen hands and brilliant minds of women. Their most visible, and perhaps most powerful, role was that of the patron. You travel to the small northern Italian city of Mantua, which, under the rule of its marchioness, Isabella d'Este, has become a glittering center of culture to rival any other. You enter her private sanctuary, her studiolo, a small room that is one of the most famous and curated spaces in all of Europe. It is a treasure box of art and learning. The walls are covered with allegorical paintings she personally commissioned from the greatest masters of the day. She was not a passive buyer. Her letters reveal her to be a demanding, precise, and sometimes infuriatingly specific client. You can almost read over her shoulder as she writes to the great Perugino, dictating the exact dimensions, the subject matter, the number of figures, and even the specific allegorical meaning of every element in the painting she wants. She was an intellectual, a shrewd political operator who ruled Mantua as regent for her young son, and a collector with an impeccable and expensive eye. She famously hounded Leonardo da Vinci for years, trying to get him to paint a single picture for her collection, a pursuit that he, in his typical fashion, kept endlessly promising but never delivered. Then there was the more complex role of the muse, the face that launched 1,000 masterpieces. In Florence, the undisputed queen of this realm was Simonetta Vespucci, a young noblewoman whose legendary beauty was said to have captivated the entire city, including the ruling Medici brothers. She became the face of an ideal, the model for Botticelli's goddesses and graces, a symbol of a perfect, untouchable beauty. Her tragically early death from consumption only cemented her mythic status, turning a real woman into a beautiful ghost who haunted the Florentine imagination. Yet, for every idealized muse, there was a real, living woman. You see it in Leonardo's most famous portrait, the one he carried with him for years and never delivered to its commissioner. The face of Lisa Gerdini, the wife of a Florentine merchant who has become known to the world as Mona Lisa. She is not a goddess, she is a woman, and the power of the painting is in its profound, unknowable humanity. But what of the women who held the brush themselves? The path for a female artist was incredibly difficult. They were barred from joining guilds, forbidden from studying the male nude, which was the foundation of high Renaissance art, and generally confined to the lesser genres of portraiture and still life. Yet a few, through sheer force of talent and circumstance, broke through. You meet a woman like Sophonespa Anguissola, the daughter of a minor nobleman who recognized his children's talents and made the unusual decision to give them a humanist education, including training in painting. Sophonespa's talent was so remarkable that she gained international fame. An eccentric but telling curiosity from her life is that the great Michelangelo himself saw one of her drawings of a laughing girl and was so impressed that he gave her informal guidance, even challenging her to draw a crying boy, a test she passed with flying colors. She would eventually be invited to the court of King Philip II of Spain, where she served as the official court painter, an almost unheard of position for a woman. Historians still debate the extent to which women artists were systematically written out of early art history, or if their relative obscurity was simply a consequence of the social structures that limited their opportunities from the start. But in the determined careers of women like Sophonespa Anguissola and the powerful patronage of Isabella d'Este, you see the other side of the Renaissance, the quiet, persistent, and essential contributions of the unseen hands that helped weave the Golden Age into being. You have spent your time in the rarefied air of palaces and papal apartments. You have walked with artists who conversed with God through their work, and with patrons who reshaped cities with their gold. But this glittering world, this Renaissance that we speak of with such reverence, was an island, and you are now stepping off its shores and into the vast, churning ocean of everyday life, where the vast majority of the population lived. You leave the marble piazza and turn into a narrow, unpaved side street, and the entire sensory world changes. The air is no longer perfumed with incense and beeswax, but thick with the smell of wood smoke, baking bread, human sweat, animal dung, and the pungent aroma from the tanners' workshops. The sounds are not of quiet scholarly debate, but of hammers ringing on anvils, the shouts of vendors, the rumble of wooden cartwheels, and the ever-present backdrop of church bells, marking the hours of a day defined not by artistic inspiration, but by labor. This is the world of the 95%. For them, the great intellectual debate is not about Plato versus Aristotle, but about whether the price of grain will rise next week. Your life is governed by two things: your guild and your parish. The guild is your union, your social security, and your prison. It dictates the price of your goods, the quality of your work, and the long, slow path from apprentice to master. You might be a weaver, a stonemason, a baker, your hands calloused and your back aching from years of repetitive, physically demanding work. Your home is likely a single, crowded room above your workshop, shared with your family and perhaps a few apprentices sleeping on straw pallets. Privacy is a luxury you have never known. The window is a small, unglazed opening covered by a wooden shutter, and the dim interior smells of cooking and unwashed bodies. Your diet is a monotonous cycle of bread, beans, and a thick vegetable porridge called pottage. Meat is a rare and festive treat, perhaps a bit of pork on a major holiday. The lavish banquets you hear tales of, with their roasted peacocks and mountains of sweets, are as distant and mythical as the lives of the gods painted on the ceilings of the great chapels. An eccentric but pervasive feature of your life is the existence of sumptuary laws, regulations that dictate what you are allowed to wear based on your social class. A merchant's wife might be forbidden from wearing the fine silk or the particular shade of crimson reserved for the nobility. It is a way of keeping the social order visible, a constant reminder of your place in the great pyramid of society. And yet, it is not a life without joy. Life's rhythm is punctuated by an endless calendar of saints' days and religious festivals. These are the moments when the entire city explodes with color and noise. You watch as processions parade through the streets, carrying painted banners and relics of the saints. And then there is Carnival, the period of madness before the solemn fast of Lent. It is a time when the world is turned upside down. Social hierarchies are temporarily dissolved. A peasant can be crowned the lord of misrule for a day, mocking the rich and powerful without fear of reprisal. There are races, feasts, and chaotic, drunken celebrations in the streets. Historians still debate how much the intellectual currents of humanism actually trickled down to the general populace. Did the average woolcarder care that ancient Greek manuscripts were being rediscovered? It seems unlikely. His concerns were far more immediate: the health of his children, the success of the harvest, the salvation of his soul. For the vast majority of people living through this period, the Renaissance was not a golden age they were aware of. It was simply the world as it had always been, a difficult, precarious, and yet deeply felt life, lived in the growing shadow of a few magnificent, impossible masterpieces. The spirit of rebirth you have witnessed is not a force that can be contained by city walls, or even by the formidable barrier of the Alps. It is a restless, powerful energy, an insatiable curiosity about the limits of human potential. And now, you follow that energy as it flows out of the workshops and universities and spills down to the sea, to the bustling, salt-sprayed docks of Lisbon and Seville. You stand on a quay, and the world feels different here. The ambition is just as palpable as it was in Florence, but its object is not a block of marble. It is the vast, terrifying, and promising emptiness of the Atlantic Ocean, the Sea of Darkness. The air is thick with the smell of tar, hemp rope, and strange, exotic spices from the coast of Africa. You hear a dozen languages being spoken by sailors with sun-scorched skin. You see a new kind of vessel being loaded with provisions, the caravel, small, light, and agile, designed not for the calm Mediterranean, but for wrestling with the unknown swells of the open ocean. This great outward push, this age of discovery, is not a separate story from the Renaissance. It is its final, most dramatic chapter. The same intellectual fire that drove the humanists to hunt for lost manuscripts drove these men to hunt for lost lands. For centuries, the European map of the world had been a small, known circle surrounded by myth and speculation. Now, that map was being aggressively redrawn. This was fueled, in part, by the rediscovery of ancient texts. Just like in Florence, scholars had unearthed and translated Ptolemy's geography, a brilliant work of Roman cartography that had been lost to the West for 1,000 years. It gave them a new, scientific framework for understanding the globe. But Ptolemy had made a critical mistake. He had dramatically underestimated the circumference of the Earth, making the world seem much smaller than it actually is. This colossal error, this ancient piece of fake news, is what made a voyage like Christopher Columbus's seem not just possible, but logical. He wasn't a reckless madman sailing off the edge of the world. He was a man armed with the best, albeit flawed, science of his day, who believed Asia was just a few weeks' sail to the west. The motivations were a complex Renaissance brew. There was the desire for knowledge, the pure humanist impulse to see what was over the horizon. There was religious zeal, a continuation of the crusading spirit, a desire to bypass the Ottoman Empire and take the fight against Islam to its rear, and to bring Christianity to the pagan peoples of the world. And then there was the most powerful engine of all, the pursuit of wealth. The spices of the East, pepper, cloves, and cinnamon, were worth more than their weight in gold, and their trade was monopolized by the Venetian and Ottoman empires. The kings of Portugal and Spain were willing to finance these incredibly risky voyages for the chance to find a new sea route to the Indies and cut out the middlemen. It was the Medici business model on a global scale. a high-risk investment for an unimaginable return. So you watch as these ships set sail. An eccentric curiosity of the time was the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, where the Pope, to prevent a war between Spain and Portugal, simply drew a line down the middle of the Atlantic on a map and declared that everything to the west of it belonged to Spain and everything to the east belonged to Portugal. It was perhaps the most arrogant act of map-making in history, dividing a world that neither party had even seen yet. When Columbus returned, not with the spices of Asia, but with tales of a new world, it was a discovery as profound as finding a lost dialogue of Plato. It fundamentally broke the old world view. There were entire continents and civilizations that were not mentioned in the Bible, that were unknown to the Greeks and Romans. The world was suddenly, shockingly, bigger, stranger, and more complex than anyone had ever imagined. Historians still debate whether the primary motivation for these voyages was economic greed, religious fervor, or pure intellectual curiosity. In truth, it was all of them, tangled together, the same explosive mix of pride, piety, and profit that was building the great cathedrals and funding the great art. The Renaissance man was not content to just repaint the heavens. He wanted to remap the earth as well. The magnificent energy you have witnessed, this grand explosion of creativity and discovery, has made Italy the jewel of the world. And at the heart of that jewel is Rome. Under the rule of another Medici Pope, Clement VII, the city has reached an apex of splendor and self-assurance. It is the undisputed capital of Christendom, a city teeming with the world's greatest artists, who are busy beautifying it into a new, earthly paradise. You walk its streets in the spring of 1527, and it feels as if the Golden Age is permanent, as if the city is protected not just by its walls, but by its own sacredness. The air hums with the sound of hammers from the ongoing construction of the new St. Peter's. Cardinals in crimson silk ride by on fine horses, their retinues a river of color and wealth. The city feels rich, powerful, and utterly invulnerable. But it is a beautiful, fragile bubble, and it is about to be burst by the brutal realities of the world that the Renaissance had so long tried to perfect and keep at bay. The problem, as it so often is politics. Pope Clement VII is a master of Renaissance culture, but a disastrously indecisive statesman. He finds himself caught in a vice between the two great superpowers of the age, King Francis I of France and the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, who are locked in a titanic struggle for control of Italy. Clement, trying to play them off against each other, makes a catastrophic error. He switches his allegiance from the powerful emperor to the French. In response, an enraged